Welcome to Venture in the South. These are the stories of innovation and success in the southern U.S. that make money, have fun, and do good.
Welcome back to Venture in the South, a podcast about angel investing and startups in the Southeastern United States. On this week's episode, I'm your host, Paul, and I'm joined by Robin Smith, who is the CEO of a company called Darby. Darby is based in Greenville, South Carolina, but Robin is joining us from Boston, where he lives. So a bit of a Eastern Seaboard show today. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We will start this off for people who aren't familiar with you. Maybe you could just give us a quick intro to your background and career in startups and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, I have an interesting background. It's probably non-traditional from a lot of life science CEOs, but from a technical standpoint, kind of mirrors a lot of people's lives. I started my career in the mid '90s in startups. So I've started. Now Darby is the sixth startup organization I've now been lucky enough to work at, and it's the first one in 30 years that I've been working at that I didn't start myself. So it's a pretty interesting experience here at Darby, and a unique one for me personally. I started my career as a chemist, a lab nerd in Burroughs Wellcome down in North Carolina. I went through a few startups, but probably the most relevant experience was my team and we built the very first electronic lab notebook in the late '90s, raised some venture capital in 2000 in North Carolina, built that business, and then exited in 2005 to a robotics company in California, which moved me out west. So it's probably the most relevant experience around starting and building enterprise software, changing people's behaviors, and doing something totally brand new that everybody told us we shouldn't be doing when we were young kids back then. But it was quite a journey.
Very neat. So who did you raise money from in North Carolina in the year 2000?
So it was Hatteras Venture Partners.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
actually the very first investment they made. I met Clay Thorpe in a library of all places at the Biotechnology Center library is where we met.
Okay.
And he was starting the venture fund, and I was trying to figure out whether I needed venture capital. I had no idea what I was doing. And we teamed up at that time, and we had a pretty good exit in 2005. It was a hard era because of 9/11. So we were one of the few portfolio companies at the time that kind of got out for that time period.
Yeah, I imagine there were a few challenges along the way between 2000 and 2005 to get to an exit, but a positive exit for the first deal out of a VC
Mhm.
fund is good news for everybody. So
Yes,
congratulations. Congratulations
yes,
on that.
we're very lucky, very lucky.
And so what then took you back up to Boston?
So I started another company actually in Silicon Valley. The company that acquired us, they had built robots to do chemistry and high throughput chemistry. And you're sitting around at your house with your friends, drinking beers, talking about what we called back then data exhaust. So there's all this data coming off these robots. It was so much that we couldn't understand it. So we started writing algorithms to self-aggregate that data. And we actually wrote the very first patent for big data back in 2007 in Silicon Valley. And like the good nerds that we were, we focused it on chemistry and not in consumer. So some lessons learned there over time.
Okay,
But
yeah.
yeah, that company was acquired by Perkin-Elmer in 2011, and that moved me here to Boston. And I ran R&D for Perkin-Elmer for about 3.5 years. For that awesome experience. I mean, what a company Perkin-Elmer is and was, just storied science American company, just really doing innovative stuff, and taught me a lot because as a startup person, a young one back then, younger than I am now, but back then, I had been used to running places with maybe 10 or 15 people. And all of a sudden now, as part of Perkin-Elmer's new informatics team, I was in charge of R&D with about 500 software engineers, and looking around going, oh my God, I need some help and some training to level myself up to this challenge. And
Yeah,
it's quite of an experience. It was great learning experience.
very cool. So what brought you then into the Darby story? How did that happen?
Yeah, so life happens, and at PerkinElmer, my father came down with lung cancer actually while I was working there. So I left PerkinElmer, spent some time with my dad, going through the healthcare world, seeing how miserable it is, and ended up starting a cell therapy company, actually of all things, in 2014. Raise some more capital. And you know how the world goes. We were kind of plugging away at that challenge, and then COVID hits in 2019. We converted everything we were doing in our automated lab to COVID testing. And I remember telling my team, standing in front of our team, going, "We're going to do this for about 3 months to help the country, and then we'll be done. It'll be okay." And it never ended. So this COVID testing thing never ended, and we got pretty good at it. We ended up acquiring another company running COVID testing out west. fascinating. There's a whole story around this at some point we could dig into, or if anybody ever wants to ask me. Almost went public during that time period, but then ended up having that company rolled up in 2021 by a private equity firm. But during the COVID era, I met the founder of Darby, Jackson Stone. He was actually running a COVID collection group called Empathy, and we were doing the testing on the back end for him. And we became friends and stayed in touch over the years, even after COVID ended. And we went off to different things, and he went off to get his MBA and start up Darby. And then he reached out to me just recently about this opportunity, this company.
Okay, got it. And then you have come into Darby as CEO this year. So how did that happen, and how has that gone?
Yeah, it's gone very well. It happened serendipity sometimes, but it's always a tough challenge when you think about coming into an organization that you didn't start. And I'm a founder first person. I've started a lot of companies, and I don't want to be an interloper in any of these experiences. Or you have to have a lot of respect for what the startup team has built and their values. And so, Jackson was asking for a little bit of advice around just technical things, and we are having breakfast. And then he said, "Hey, maybe you should meet Charlotte, the other CEO and other founder." Met Charlotte, and she had talked to me about some things that were going on in the company. Met the investors, and then one day they asked if I would like to join the organization, and kind of slowly drew me in to this organization. And probably the biggest draw for the organization, set aside the technology, was the values and the core kind of goodness inside of the organization from a team perspective. And Charlotte had really done just a fantastic job of setting that up. And that's what really drew me into it is, man, with a team that's got these kind of values in a technologically hot market that we're in today, with just a burning strange need that we're in, creates opportunity, and also an ability for me to come in and not have to do a lot of changes, but help guide the team and help grow it and scale it. So that's what got me excited about this
Okay,
opportunity.
got it. Yeah, culture and team are obviously a key part of the success of a startup. So I'm glad that that was so important on your decision to join. But also, what the company does is pretty important. So maybe we could just step out of that and understand a little bit about what Darby does. If you could take a few minutes to do that.
Yeah, so Darby is in a very interesting niche market. Darby, the technology, the core technology for Darby enables patient intake. So in a very specific market, the market is the HME or DME space. It's durable medical equipment. Darby started on a focus around PAP and CPAP devices. So when you go to a provider, your physician, and you're diagnosed with the need to get a CPAP device, that order is then pushed to a provider, a DME firm, a firm that actually supplies the device. And this is kind of where the world parallels my life back in the electronic lab notebook world. Back when I started that business, we found out that scientists are writing things in paper lab notebooks. And I did that too when I started my journey as a nerdy lab scientist. And when Jackson explained 80% of the physician referrals to the DME companies are done on a fax, I was like, what? I was like, really? No, it can't be. This is the year 2025. This can't happen. So it's amazing. It's just an incredible thing. So I went to a conference actually to help validate this. I went to MedTrade where all the DME suppliers were there, and they all nodded, yes, we use faxes. And we have manual data entry teams. Actually, Darby's named after the fastest data entry person that Jackson had worked with, and her name was Darby. So the company's actually named after a person that did fast data entry. It's again part of the values and charm of the business, right? And so digging into that a little bit more, I was like, well, what happens when we start automating this? And two things. One is the patient gets their equipment a lot faster, which helps the patient. Second, the data entry teams become very, very efficient, and that time shrinks from anywhere from 5 to 7 days. Sometimes it takes up to a month to actually go through the cycles of data entry and manual corrections and error fixes to just 5 minutes. So it saves the DME company a lot of money to their bottom line. And those two aspects I think are very important. And there's a lot of work to be done in the space to clean that up. And just some of my own experiences, even with my father going into waiting rooms, you get a clipboard and you fill it out. And like, this is the state of healthcare today. And it's just, there's a lot of opportunity for fixing that. And Darby's doing a very good job at this. And that's, it works very well.
Okay, got it. So you sell your software to the DME providers to help them get the incoming orders more efficiently.
That is correct. It's a very niche market, but it's a pretty good sizable market, and there's a lot of volumes in it. And it's automating the world, right? It's helping solve a really tough problem that's important to both patients and the suppliers.
Okay. And so just to understand the workflow, they're still getting the facts and you're a software that interprets the facts and turns it into data, or are you a conduit between a computer at the physician's end and the computer at the DME provider?
So we're doing a little bit of both. So originally it was just a fax ingestion. So we'd have like a giant, the metaphor is like a giant digital catcher's mitt that would capture all the faxes and then shove it into, we'll digitize it, use AI to digitize it, solve some of the kind of weird recognition problems, and then integrate it into kind of the patient registry systems at the DMEs. And as we started getting a little bit more sophisticated, we started learning that, hey, there's some errors and there's some fax backs that need to happen and some checks and stuff. So as we're starting to grow, we're growing a little bit horizontally, not too much because we want to be very careful to still continue to focus on that burning need and, figure out that 80% problem. So, there's definitely integrations to the patient registry records. And then there's also some communication back and forth to make sure that that catcher's mitt is prepared and ready to get all the information necessary to have a clean record going into those.
And so, if you can talk about this a bit, how big is the company? How many customers do you work with at present, and how many CPAP machines are you responsible for?
So we just started implementing a daily ingestion kind of count at the company, which is fascinating to see. And it's episodic a little bit, goes up and down. But I'll talk in generalities. We're still small. They just found product market fit late last year. Probably have about dozen to nearly a half dozen installs with these DME customers. One of the largest DME vendors, VGM, is one of our customers, as well as our they're an investor in the company as well, a recent one, which is excellent. And they're basically introducing us almost like bespoke introductions to some of their partners, which has been very fruitful for us as a company. We just did an install last week with a new customer, and we have another one next week. So we have to just be a little careful about how much we're eating at this time because our company is still small. Darby's still a pretty small organization. We're only small, like 4 or 5 software engineers, a couple that I've worked with for about 25 years now. I brought onto the team and to augment the good team that was there. And we're being very careful about having high quality engagements as I've joined and just doing those very carefully throughout this year. Since we're a small company, we don't need a lot of business to become break even, which is also a blessing and a curse in some ways. And this is it's an interesting inflection point for the business as we kind of get better and better at our systems, and then start growing over the next 6 months to start scaling the business up to more broad enterprise scale.
Okay, got it. And your general business model, I imagine, is some kind of subscription software rather than a per transaction or per fax deal, or is it some of both?
It's kind of it's a subscription, so it's a monthly subscription, but it's bucketed on volumes. So there's like a small, medium, large volume kind of bucket, and there's overage charges if somebody goes over, or we try to get them into the next bucket up. It's fascinating. How do you price things and do it right and do it in a fair way? So I think there's learning that goes on in this kind of early phase as we're growing up. But a few things that we're doing, we're launching a Darby 3.0 next week, actually, at the Heartland Summit in Waterloo, Iowa. It's a VGM summit. And as part of that, there'll be some pre-built in automations and integration points. And then soon after that, we're launching a Darby Lite system, which will enable customers that are mom and pops that may be too small for big configurations or enterprise software to be able to just buy a really out of the box system that's highly useful for them to get started. Because a lot of these companies don't even have internal IT staff to do integration. So we wanted to make something super easy for the small companies, which in a lot of cases aren't that small, but the smaller players in the market. There's a massively huge long tail in this marketplace with these DME vendors, and they need to be serviced and they need to have robust technologies supporting them.
Okay, got it. So yeah, I can see the mom and pops would use it for a relatively small number of products, probably, and the bigger players probably get a lot of value out of not only collecting a larger volume of faxes, but figuring out what device we're talking about and where they distribute it and all of that.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay,
That is correct.
got it. And so, how do you articulate your value to them? Is it time saved dealing with faxes, or is it more revenue because you can start charging a week earlier because you can fulfill earlier, or what?
I think it's a combination of a few things, and we're still working through what's the best way to articulate ROI to these firms. One is they'll need less people to scale their data intake because the data intake is the bottleneck right now. If they wanted to add more customers, they'd have to add more data intake team, and that's extraordinarily expensive. Those teams churn like crazy, these data entry teams. So just alleviating that component of their internal spend is a huge ROI. Getting that device to customers faster, of course, cash in faster for them helps. But I think, as the markets, the context changes every day externally. So gross margins are being squeezed in a lot of different ways from a hardware manufacturer's perspective. So these organizations are looking for ways to increase gross margins and even just, the bottom line to the company by automating as much as they can. And I think we provide a great solution for that, and probably one of the largest sectors that they can actually take action on.
Got it. Okay. And then from your perspective, are you now an AI first company? I guess 5 years ago when you're having these first discussions, that probably wasn't the way it was described, but I feel like there are a lot more tools now and a lot more plausibility of calling this an AI first company. Is that what's happened?
Yeah, so you could even have asked me this question 3 months ago and it'd be different than today, or even 2 weeks ago. But it's absolutely fascinating. I mentioned that, I had a software team of 500 engineers, at PerkinElmer reporting to me. This team of 4 or 5 people, we can do a lot, especially with AI coding agents, the ability to just accelerate and use Claude Code, for instance, to build test cases for us and build out the systems and get rid of the grunt work. It's fascinating to me. You can throw a chunk of code in and go, "Hey, comment on this for me," and it'll do all the commenting for you. Or you can hire some, interns, and the code may be formed up bad, but you can give it your own code and say, "Form that like mine," and make it uniform. So there's a lot of the necessities of refactoring technologies. In the past, it was always constant refactor going on as companies were scaling and building. That's gone now. So I think when I think about the term AI first, there's an internal AI first perspective, which is, are we using AI first internally? Absolutely. And that's accelerating us. Externally first, I would probably say, yeah, we're probably, marching down that path very quickly because we're using more and more AI to do interesting things with the data that's coming inbound from these patients. We see everything coming in. When we get a patient record that we're pushing up, not only are we seeing the device that's needed and the order, but we also see the patient history come through. And there's a lot of really good things you could do the right way for patients. Everybody's different, but they're kind of the same. If you're on a CPAP device, you're going to go down a journey. We know that you're going to need resupply at these times, way ahead of when the physician knows this, because there's just too much information going around for a human to digest it. But these systems can digest this immediately. So, I think about our company as now, near, and then far. And so the now is more patient intake, just get really good at that, onboard our customers, build our stable business, get the gyroscope going. Near is, how can we start helping the DMEs expand their margins by understanding what their inventories look like and where the demographics are going. And then long term, we think about, how does all this influence what the patient's journey is going to look like? And are there intuitive inferences we could make for the patient to help them in a different way? And maybe the provider as well, because a lot of times the providers, they're treating what's in front of them today, but they're not thinking about what could happen to this patient downstream. And so I think there's the long-term Darby is, I think, going to be shaped and sized very differently than the near term and now Darby. But I think it's healthcare and health tech, as we all know, is just it's it's the most important thing. If you're not healthy, you can't take advantage of anything in life that's there. So I think, our goal is, how do we keep people ticking along and going, and everybody has situations and experiences similar to mine with, family members that have been ill before, and things happen, and it's really important. This is the most important thing,
Yeah,
for
no
us.
doubt.
Yeah.
Right. That's why we spend a sixth of all our money on healthcare, because it's the most important thing we spend money on. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on the far part then. So I understand. I think the problem you're solving and getting the equipment essentially more efficiently procured and at the patient. And then you're saying that the data flow allows you to do smarter things in the future, like make sure they have the resupplies on consumables or a replacement and maintenance and things like that as the life cycle of that equipment goes along. Is that what you were
Yeah.
were
So I think
explaining?
that's a simple thing to do. I mean, I think it's kind of intuitive that everybody goes, "Oh yeah, why wouldn't you do that?" Right? So of course we tackle that challenge. But I think when you really think far with patients and this marketplace and this whole kind of DME ecosystem, I think there's ways to almost think about it more like a platform where we're thinking about what may happen to what's the standard kind of patient outcome when they're using this device. How can we intervene to prevent them from getting to the next worst level? And are there strategies to kind of bust them out of the pattern that they're going down now and move them to kind of a more successful outcome, downstream? Because, even with just, let's use CPAP for instance. I mean, sleep apnea and things like that are affecting people there's cardiac risks that happen as downstream from that, right? So, if you don't start addressing the cardiac issues now, then the outcomes are going to be worse in the future. So I think there's ways that we can take advantage of all the data, map out where are the successful outlier outcomes, and how do we start mapping those to people that are just in the standard path of, I just need to get the CPAP device. And maybe you need that, but maybe you might want to do some earlier interventions around cardiac health, or some other types of interventions to help give a better outcome downstream, and lower the whole. I mean, this if this works, then you can lower the cost for everything downstream, and yeah, and extend the quality of life.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. In the nearer term, in the now bucket, as investors, we see a lot of competition slides that say there's the main competition here is inertia, just staying using the same methods that people have already done. And given that the current method is fax machines, I feel like that's been around a while, and there's probably quite a lot of inertia there. So, how do you convince people to move from the same strategy they've used for the last 50?
Yeah, it's I mean, I can give you the concrete example of when I joined. I joined in some customer demos, and I was shocked. 30% of the demos that I sat in on converted to signed up customers. Like, and it wasn't a lot because we don't have a lot of customers, but I was like, we need to slow down a bit on the demos because I was a little bit worried that we weren't going to be able to implement in a high quality way. But there's definitely a pull from the marketplace that, yeah, we need this stuff. And you bring up an interesting point about competition, and I think about this a lot because I've always had, every startup I've been in, it's always when you get beat on by the competition. And I personally, I don't like the little check boxes you see at the table with, like, you have more checks than the competition has checks, but nobody really knows who's got what. I think about competition a lot differently now as I get a little bit older and I reflect on it. I think competition isn't competition. I think those people that are out there doing similar things that we're doing are actually helping to build the ecosystem, and we need them. They need us. We need each other to build the ecosystem out to help inform customers that we're not touching that there's a need. And sooner or later, people start glomming onto the top two, three systems that are out there. And I think we're in the top two or three now. And we'll, because it's very, very new, and we need to stay there, and we need to be competitive to stay there. But we also need those others that are out there working in the same space we are to help create that ecosystem and the marketplace. If we're the only ones out there, it's not a business. So, we need that. And our customers also may buy more than one piece of software for different purposes. I joke all the time when, I can ask you right now, like, what kind of sneakers are you wearing? And you might say Nikes. And I said, are Nikes the only shoe you buy? And you're going to say no. People have Microsoft SharePoint, they have Box, they have a little bit of everything. That's the way the world works. There's going to be multiple different systems at play all the time, and that's okay. And we need to be okay with it as mature companies. Maybe it's because I'm old and I got too much gray. I'm like so zen about competition. I'm like, I think it's good, and they become your partners.
And no, I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that investors sometimes obsess about is exit potential, and have people on the team actually taken a company from execution to a positive outcome. And you led off the show by telling us you'd done that on the first one in 2000, and clearly some successful ones since. So, what do you think is the possibility of that for Darby, and when?
Yeah, and this is probably a good platform for me to say this. I always joke that doing a startup is like getting on a road trip with your friends. So, like, we're going to get on a road trip from Greenville, South Carolina, but we're going to drive to San Francisco. So we're all going to pile into a minivan together, but we're only going to go at night. So we can only see 200 yards in front of us. That's exactly the way a startup is. You know where you're going, but you can only see a little bit ahead of you, right? And on that journey, an exit might come up and you're like, hey, let's go get a burger or let's go see this view. And some people may say, we're going to go pull over here or we're going to keep going. And I think that's the way you have to think about a startup is there's natural inflection points for the business. Darby right now, we're going to add on a little bit more funding for the business. We're going to kind of see our way through this little bit of mini scale, I call it. And then we're going to kind of look out on the road and see, keep driving. Do we go for a Series A downstream early 2026? Do we raise a Series A round to really drop the hammer and go a lot faster? Or does one of our partners and us get together and say, hey, we should team up and go do this together? Should we, find 3 or 4 partners and do an aggregation together? Who knows, right? So I think these natural discussions, and that's why I think the ecosystem is important because sometime an exit is a big player, sometime an exit is teaming up with 3 or 4 other organizations that have complementary pieces and forming a much more effective, high quality experience for the customers. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. And I think one of my mentors in the past, who was a venture partner at Harris Ventures, they were one of my investors in a previous company. His name's Doug Jameson. And he told me, optionality is what you want. You always want to make decisions to allow you to have more decisions in the future, not less. So I think when I think about Darby, there's a lot of optionality right now, and we need to continue that optionality as we drive the business, and then we'll be okay. If we close off those options now, it's too good.
Okay, I like that. That's a good answer. What are your biggest challenges or things you are needing to make decisions about right now?
So, I think the team is pretty well positioned. I think some of the interesting challenges we have are there's so much to do. And the danger in a company like Darby is there's there's too much to do and there's so many shiny things we can go grab onto, right? Do we jump into the clinical trial space now or do we wait? Those are really important decisions for us because if you do it too soon, it stretches you too thin. You're not going to do a high quality job. It also distracts you from executing in the current marketplace we're in. So I think the biggest challenge for us now is to think very carefully through on the next 6 month roadmap of how much resource do we pour into the now to keep executing versus when do we start investing a little bit in that near because we're going to have to. And the timing of that is going to be critical for us to make sure we manage our spend, but also manage the distractibility inside. Because you know what happens as soon as you start something new somewhere, everybody wants to do the new thing. Nobody wants to do, the kind of thing that builds the gyroscope in the company. So I think the challenge is making sure we really do a high quality job for our customers in the next 6 months and stick to our knitting, but interleave in enough of that innovation to keep the future optionality where we want it to be. And those are tough challenges, and they're always different answers in every company because just like in music, every band is different. When you get Sammy Hagar that joins Van Halen, it's not the same Van Halen anymore as with David Lee Roth. And David Lee Roth on his own with others, not the same. So I think this is an interesting inflection point for Darby. We have a team and we have a very good team, and we got to figure out what style it's going to be when we develop it. And it's all people based, right? All this stuff is people based.
Okay, that's a very creative challenge you've got ahead of you, that's for sure. And so I guess the remote part is something that's a little bit different for this situation than most of a typical venture south portfolio company where the CEO is in the city from the beginning. How do you envisage the distributed team working in future? And do you think we need to convince you to move down back to North Carolina or South Carolina to be effective?
Well, my mother still lives in Eastern North Carolina, so I'm down there all the time, and I still go visit Clay and the guys from Hatteras and all my old investors down there. And we do have my 2 software engineers from the previous 25 years still live in the Triangle, so they're still there. It's funny because the first business I started that was that ELN business, when we exited, I moved to California, but the rest of the software development team stayed in North Carolina. When we started the next company, Artist Labs, the big data company, that team was still in North Carolina for that entire run. So got a lot of practice running kind of remote. Back then it was like you pick up the phone and you call. So I remember in the morning I would be on the phone with every single person individually. And back then it was like WebEx and other things like this. So we spend a lot of time together on Zooms and Google Meets or whatever. I think we use every system, which is really strange too. But we spend a lot of time on virtual calls together. We actually do interesting kind of virtual coding together too. Like we'll pop open a window with Cloud Code and we'll all be looking at it together, which is fascinating. Just kind of a different style of doing that. Do the same around product and marketing. And then we do have the team, and I got to thank Underscore Ventures for this. They let us borrow some conference rooms here. So we do bring the team together here on site in Boston routinely. So we're going to do another one in a few weeks here coming up. Probably should find a WeWork down in South Carolina, North Carolina, because it'd be nice to do some stuff down there with the team so we don't always bring everybody up to Boston, especially in the winter. And so I think there's a little bit of, we do try to get together. That adds a little bit more cost, but then we don't have real offices. So that reduces cost. So in the end, it's probably a wash, I would say, on facilities. But I think part of it is also having a very good team that, you meet and you talk about a challenge, and sometimes you need to let people go do the work and get their head down and do the work and not bother them. So I think that is also super helpful because I'm older now too, so I try not to poke my head in and bug people too much. But you got to give the actual team doing the work time and space to get their stuff done and be thoughtful about it. And sometimes in an office, it's a little bit more distracting because somebody's always poking around or could get distracting.
Yeah, no, right. I think that's a very, very good point. You entrust the team to go do what they say they're going to do, and actually need to give them the room to go do it.
That's the second part's always the part that people forget.
Yeah, right.
Because there's always meetings.
We can definitely hook you up with some space if you're back down in the Southeast. What else can people do to help you or Darby from here?
I think one of the most important things for Darby, and I think this goes for any company, is I love to get to know customers. I love to be in customers' facilities, looking at how they do things. Back in the old lab days when we were building the ELN, I probably visited 2,500 biotechs around the country and the world. And I was in their labs, checking it out. And I think if anybody's hearing this and they have, anything to do with patient intake or the way healthcare is bringing patients on board, whether it's a medical facility or a physician's office, I'd love to talk to them because, it's interesting. You can get a written spec and you can hold that spec up next to somebody doing the work, and it's going to be completely different what you're seeing them do than what's written down. And that's why it's so important to be around the customers and to kind of be involved with them and understand what they're doing. And I think that deep understanding leads to innovation. It also leads to a much more quality interaction with the groups. I love it. And I think there's nothing better than learning about what's going on in a space. And then you learn also the resistance sometimes internally for change, right? Because, we're going to be changing a workflow from manual hand processing thing to a headless, AI driven operation. And that's freaky sometimes to people. I think also understanding what motivates them and what freaks them out is important as we get going. So I'd love to learn more about this space. It's a new space for me. So I feel like I'm learning all again, brand new. So it's, life is a constant learning exercise and I love it. And I think this space, especially around this really interesting facts world is something, digging into it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, hopefully you will be one of the people that contribute to facts is going away for all time for good. So hopefully we'll cross that off.
Yeah. It's the strangest thing,
Yeah, well,
why?
Yeah, we do. I mean, you do hear it all the time. There are so many industries that are still using technologies that are 2 generations behind, but that's just the way they are. And eventually somebody does come along and figures out how to modernize them, but there are so many of them that aren't there yet. Yeah. Well, good. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for taking some time to be on the show today and introducing the Darby story to listeners. We'll try to help you with those customer introductions and site facility visits and patient intake processes and see what we can do to help. But thank you for spending some time with us today.
Well, I really appreciate it. And again, I want to say thank you for Venture South's support. I mean, Darby wouldn't be doing what it's doing and building these values with the core team without the support of the team at Venture South. And that's super important. None of this happens by accident. And so it's always tough. And I want to say thanks and we really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Thank you for listening. Visit us at ventureinthesouth.com for a complete list of previous and future shows.